right, folks, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are absolutely delighted and a bit intrigued by the fact that almost 150 people have signed up for this seminar, either to be with us live or to listen to the recording later. And so there must be something about this topic that is very pertinent to where we find ourselves today.
If hospitality is a feeling, I was feeling hospitality just seeing friends known and faces and names that we didn't know. So I agree, and I was feeling hospitable. So
Yes.
welcome.
Feeling welcomed and wanting to welcome each one of you. We want to give a special shout out to those of you who have joined with us today who had signed up for our seminar at the Apprentice Gathering. We were disappointed to need to decline to attend. And we're so grateful for your graciousness to us and thankful that we can do this 90-minute seminar, even though it was supposed to be a 7-hour seminar. So we'll do our best to cover what we feel like are the really important, pertinent things about this topic. But thank you so much for joining us. I do want to mention that in the chat, you'll find at the very beginning of the chat that there is a link to the notes for today. If you would have received that link as well in an email from Emma, our communications coordinator, who is also on the call and manning the Zoom room so that she can admit people for us. So big shout out to Emma as well. We're so grateful that she could do that, even though she's on a train right now en route from Chicago to South Bend, I think she said. So yeah, so there are a link to the notes, and it could be helpful to you just to follow along, or you can just look at them later and take your own notes, or however you want to experience this time together. So I think I would like to begin just with a moment of silence. We are learning that silence is actually a very hospitable space. And so to create the kind of environment that we desire to have together today, we would like to take a moment of being quiet and still. And so I invite you right now to be present to yourself, to be present in your body, to be present to your breath, and to be present to God, who is both within us and all around us. Spirit of the living God, we are so grateful to be welcomed by you, and we welcome you. Our spirits bear witness with the Holy Spirit that we belong to you, and we belong to one another. And that's why this topic is so very important today in this world that feels very inhospitable much of the time. May you be present with each one of us and lift up for every person here the gift that you have for them, the thing that you want them to take hold of and to take with them from this time. We thank you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, we would like to begin our seminar by just introducing ourselves a little bit. There are a lot of people on the call that we know, but many people who are strangers to us. So we want to let you know a little bit about us and even a bit of our story, how we ended up being the chief stewards of Fall Creek Abbey here in Indianapolis.
Well, we lived 6 decades, so it would take us a while to tell a lot of the twists and turns and features of our story. But I'll I'm going to keep it more on our ministry story a bit here. We've spent our entire adult life in various ministry roles, on college campuses, local churches, as spiritual companions and guides and directors, and now as stewards of Fall Creek Abbey, which is an urban retreat house in Indianapolis. And it was interesting for me to, even as we were preparing for this, to consider that kind of the scope and the years of our ministry through this theme of hospitality. And it, in many ways, the things that I remember the most, that seemed the most significant, were, and I don't know if I had the name for it as hospitality at the time, but were expressions of hospitality over the years through all of those expressions. And sometimes it was hospitality, frankly, that felt a bit at odds or going against the grain of the ministry structures and institutions we were a part of. And so, but it was, I bet you would find the same thing if you would recall a lot of those highlights in your story, that they were moments of hospitality, of welcoming others, and of being welcomed. So as Beth said, we want to kind of step back and particularly focus on the part of our story here at Fall Creek Abbey, because I think this is where we have, a lot of the things have become more explicit in offering this ministry of hospitality.
Yeah, and so just to kind of mark the starting point as we look back, strangely enough, the vision of what we do here at Fall Creek Abbey really began during the darkest time of our life, truly. David and I have been on staff at a mega church. He was on staff for 10, I was on staff for 6 years, both of us in pastoral roles. I think we would be quick to say that the first 9 years of our time there was really remarkable, stretching. It was an experience that I think by and large was positive, but the last year was particularly difficult for many, many reasons. And I won't go into all of those reasons. And I want to be clear that some of it belongs to us, what made it hard, and some of it belongs to others. But suffice it to say, we came to a point where we realized we simply could no longer abide in this particular environment, having gone through what we'd gone through. And so we both decided after 10 years to resign. Now, this was not a premeditated decision. It wasn't something that, that we had like a gainful employment lined up that we could exit from one place and enter another. It was a decision out of desperation. We had 2 kids in college, a third one getting ready to go to college, a fourth one at home. And yet we felt like we understood Jesus's words, what does it profit a person if you gain the whole world and forfeit your soul? And that was what was at risk for us. And so we resigned. And truthfully, that took us into a very deep and dark place for many years, financially trying to get our footing. Just the way it kind of blew up our community. It sort of caused our sense of vocational calling to become very blurry. Even our own personal faith was rocked. And so for the next few years, we just engaged in a lot of important, hard, and very painful work. Well, it was during that time that after having received spiritual direction for a number of years, the thought came to me, I wonder what it would be like to be trained to offer spiritual direction. And so I began to look around at some different programs in my area, and I discovered one in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is about 2 hours from Indianapolis. And it was being offered through a nonprofit called Sustainable Faith. Dave and Jody Nixon are the founders of Sustainable Faith. And they were housed in this beautiful old convent in kind of a gritty neighborhood in Cincinnati. And so I think 5 different times over the course of 9 months, I drove to Cincinnati for a few days. And I would be immersed in the cohort experience of learning how to offer spiritual direction and simultaneously sort of taking in everything around me that Dave and Jody and their community were participating in. And over time, I noticed myself just taking little mental snapshots of the things that I was noting. And then I would go home and I would almost like pull up those snapshots and savor them and think about them again. And I can remember thinking to myself, oh, I love what they're doing. Wow, I wish I could do what they're doing. I wish I could do what they're doing in Indianapolis. And so finally, I must have said that out loud to him.
I think you were sleeping. It was kind of something you just said in your sleep first.
Talking in my sleep. So I expressed to him that I was feeling this, real attraction to this, drawing to this ministry of hospitality and offering spiritual direction, maybe even training spiritual directors. And David was very supportive at the time, initially anyway. He wasn't sure it was going to be his thing, which required me to really lean in and decide that if God is perhaps calling me, tapping me for this opportunity, I need to figure out how to do that. So I wrote a business plan and started to network and talk to consultants and just began my journey in figuring out what it could look like. And I'm not going to go into all of the details of those several months, probably a year and a half even. I wish I could tell you that it was one of those experiences where the stars aligned and everything fell into place and we just moved into what we're doing, but that's simply not the case. It was a very up and down, twisty, turny, circuitous path we seem to follow to get where we are. But suffice it to say, on June 1st, 2012, we moved into this beautiful 110-year house in an urban neighborhood just a little bit north of downtown Indianapolis. And we began to host people and offer spiritual direction and spiritual direction training through this ministry we now call Fall Creek Abbey.
She loves to tell a story, so I'm surprised she kept it to length. She did.
I was really disciplined.
Yeah, you were, yeah. Well, I was thinking about it that at that time, and I would say even still, it's not that we set out to be, and I don't use this word typically, but we didn't set out to be experts on hospitality. And yet, I think something has happened over the last 9+ years that we've learned a few things about hospitality after we have hosted more than 9,000 guests. And this is not a big facility.
Yeah.
And they've come from as far away as Hawaii to just up the block. We've trained 12 cohorts of spiritual directors in this space, and just we feel a deep gratitude and a real grace from God to offer this space, our space, in such a way that we think of it as a still point in the city for many, many, many people. And as we seek to renew the contemplative spirit here in Indianapolis. After 30 years, all of those times in these ministry contexts with institutions and organization, they all seem to have this theme of a focus of big events and initiatives. Everything was bigger and grander and new. And then as we began to wrestle with a bit of disillusionment of the long-term impact and fruit of those big events and initiatives, we became, I don't know, it was like we discovered the beauty of small.
Yeah.
We were won over by quiet and behind the scenes ministries like hospitality.
Maybe one of the best ways to summarize that, I hate to overuse this term paradigm shift, but that's kind of what it was, is to share a quote with you from a 20th century Quaker by the name of Rufus Jones. Jones was a leader in the Quaker movement between World War I and World War II, and he was tasked to lead this international peace initiative to try to quell this looming Second World War. And he was writing to a friend when he expressed to them that he wasn't sure that he felt a lot of confidence in their ability to accomplish what they had hoped in terms of curtailing this war that was on the horizon. But what he did say that I found so compelling is that I pin my hopes to the quiet processes and small circles in which vital and transforming events take place. And I came across that quote and it stopped me in my tracks because I think it names where we began to pin our hopes in the quiet processes and small circles in which we began to see vital and transforming events take place.
So our hope for this seminar today is to recast a vision for what I'd describe as a simple, humble, often anonymous ministry of hospitality. A ministry where quiet processes and small circles and vital and transforming events can take place. And we feel that this vision has been diluted, maybe it's been distorted and devalued over the last 30 or 40 years. And so it seems like it's time to recast a vision for this beautiful ministry of hospitality.
So here are a few reasons why we believe that the ministry of hospitality is so vital. And I think what we would say even today, and I think you all must have that sense too, because of your response to this invitation to come to the seminar. So while hospitality can happen anywhere, it can happen kind of on your way, through life. It can happen in your church. It can happen in a community center, a workplace, a workout facility. Traditionally, it has been home-centered. It has happened in the home. In contrast to most ministry today, which happens outside our homes in very public and truthfully very impersonal settings. And so we would like to reclaim home as a really important place of ministry and transformation.
So a few things to think about in terms of hospitality. Hospitality, particularly in a home, it's relational. It's unscripted, just like family life. It is, there's not kind of this organized script that you're following. While often ministry today is programmatic, it's structured, and often it's content driven, but hospitality is relationally driven, and it's a bit like jazz. It's kind of this give and take and this response of those who participate. Hospitality also provides individuals with an experience of being seen and known, and this is so important at a time when people feel so alone and isolated. I think if anything, COVID has unsurfaced is the hunger, the need for connection. And often people feel really alone in their churches, maybe especially they can feel isolated in their experience of church.
Yeah. It's a very particularizing ministry. I mean, I think one of the things that we are very aware of, even when we have a group here, is that we are careful to acknowledge and to see the individuals. And that's one of the things I love about hospitality, is the way that it sees the individual, not just the herd or the group. So offering hospitality finally is also something that changes us. It's a crucible, truthfully. And when we say yes to hospitality, we are saying yes to our own transformation. In Lonnie Cullen Pratt's book about Benedictine hospitality, she says that offering hospitality, or you cannot take seriously the spiritual practice of hospitality and remain as you are. And we would say that's true, that in our almost 10 years of offering hospitality, we have changed. We have grown. The people that we have hosted have gifted us with their presence and also invited us to be affected and to be changed.
So let me describe where we're going today. We are going to loosely frame this conversation around some of the aspects of hospitality featured in the Rule of Saint Benedict. And so if you've heard of the Benedictines, they are communities scattered throughout the world who seek to live out the rule, a way of following Jesus in community. And well, for me, a number of years ago, I decided I'd become a bit untethered and went through a process of becoming an oblate of Saint Benedict. And all that means is I seek to live out some of the features and themes of the rule in my life situation as I'm able. But if you're not familiar with the rule, we're not going to actually do a, I don't know, word for word exposition of the Rule of Saint Benedict in hospitality. But this document was written in the 6th century by a man named Benedict. And from that sprung these Benedictine communities. And so this small document, really thin little what is called the rule, became the framework for how these communities would function. And they've existed for 15 centuries. How many things last that long?
That's right.
And so they seem to have just as much relevance and spiritual challenge as they did 15 centuries ago. And one of the unique features of the Rule of Saint Benedict is it's this combination of spiritual depth and practical guidance. Mm-hmm. And a major theme, both of kind of the heart and spirituality of welcoming the stranger and the practical advice, is this theme around hospitality. Mm-hmm. And so again, we're going to kind of use some of the Rule of Saint Benedict just to frame our time.
Yeah. And like David said, it's not a comprehensive sweep of everything that he had to say about hospitality, but we are going to focus on what we would say are 4 tenets or concepts that have been influential. They've really shaped the way we offer hospitality at Fall Creek Abbey, recognizing that our setting is going to be quite different from most of yours. And yet, as we look at these tenets, I think they apply no matter where you are desiring to be hospitable from, whether it's from your own home or maybe it's your church or a community center or whatever. So I think they will apply. We want to be both kind of philosophical and even theological and simultaneously really practical. So we're going to give you some of the nuts and bolts of what we've learned and how we do things and why I think we are able to celebrate our 10th anniversary this coming June with probably the likelihood of hosting over 10,000 people in those 10 years. So we're looking forward to sharing these with you.
So the first tenet we want to consider from the Rule of Saint Benedict is his admonition to receive every person as if you are receiving Christ. To receive every person as if you are receiving Christ. That could be a beautiful plaque on the wall, but it's meant to be far, far more than that. And it is more challenging than simply having it as a motto. To receive is a beautiful word. As we receive, we are open, we extend. And so when we think of receive in this sense, this word suggests a great deal of intention that goes into how we welcome someone, the way we prepare ourselves, the way we prepare our space as if we are actually welcoming Jesus would be Benedict's encouragement. It singles out, particularly, I'm just going to call it the moment of welcoming. There can be this generic welcoming that we experience. But I think what we're talking about here is this particularity of it may be a few minutes, it may be 5 minutes, that moment and event of welcoming.
We would probably say that this is where the theology of hospitality is really rooted. It's probably reflective of the words of Christ in the parable in Matthew 25, where he talks about whenever you offer hospitality to the stranger, you are offering hospitality to me. So think about that. Consider what that would mean, that every person you meet along the way, every person you encounter in your workplace, every person you invite into your home is as though you are inviting Jesus. You are welcoming Jesus. So I want you to take a moment and think about that. What difference would it make in your preparations if you were hosting Jesus for a visit? What would you do? How would you prepare your space? What kind of a meal would you want to serve? And how would you prepare yourself? Those questions are in your notes, and if you want to take a moment and just reflect on that, I think it would be good for us to take to heart what it would be like to actually welcome Jesus.
Receive people as we are receiving Christ. To do that, we need to learn to actively anticipate their arrival and create an atmosphere around us, an environment that's both external and around us, but as Beth has mentioned, it's also within us that will make them feel welcomed. We think about how to make this space welcoming, and there's a great deal of intention that probably registers with people unconsciously, but we've been highly conscious of over the years, and it's been an evolving probably way of thinking about this. But it starts the way and how we greet them at the door. That first moment, that moment of welcome I was describing, we think about what we offer them when they arrive. They've often driven, they're tired, they're weary. We don't know their story of what they've left behind that's undone. And then we're conscious about where we want to invite them to just come and sit down and drop their bags and just to be.
Yeah, I think the operative words here would be words like to anticipate, to be intentional, and to be prepared. And it's not just the physical space, although David and I would both say that we think physical space is incredibly important. In fact, I would say that we adhere to this idea that space has a spirituality, which might sound a little woo-woo to you, but I think that the kind of atmosphere that we create is felt by people when they enter into it. So it is the physical space, but it's ourselves as well. It's the state of our interior life that contributes to the environment as much as the state of our home. Are we calm and centered? Are we able to be present to the people that we are greeting, wherever it is that we're offering hospitality?
So when someone walks through the doors of Fall Creek Abbey, we want them to experience sensation of peace and quiet, of welcome, and even simple beauty. And again, I think these register at an unconscious level, but it becomes a Well, it's like a drink of cold water, I think, coming into a new space to experience those things from the first moment.
I'm thinking about last night. We had a guest arrive last night, and she's a mother of several small children. And we've met her before. She's come one other time, but and our granddaughter was here with us. And so Harper and David and I took about maybe a half hour, if that, and we just made sure that the space was all ready for this guest, so that when she walked in, she felt like we were anticipating her. And I think she did. I think she acknowledged that to us, which we feel is really important. So we'd like to share some really practical things that we've learned to create an intentional environment of welcome. And again, acknowledging that our space is unique as a retreat center, but this could apply to your home or wherever it is that you're thinking about offering hospitality through. So one of the first things that we would say is like we did last night, we want to prepare our space by making sure it's clean, it's clutter-free, and yet I would say it's comfortable. So we're not, we and as well as our home are not fancy, aren't ostentatious. We don't have white furniture and white carpeting, and people don't walk in and feel like they can't sit and relax and tuck their legs up on the sofa. We want them to feel like they're being welcomed and it's comfortable space. We think about things as I don't know, as mundane as the paint color. Like we were very intentional about choosing paint colors that were very serene and calming. On our main floor space, we don't have anything that's highly personal, like pictures of our grandchildren. Those are in our bedroom. We don't have really personalized items because we wanted people to feel like they were coming into a space that was for them, not our home. We are more minimalist, at least on the main floor. That's a little inside joke between David and I. But
the office, the basement, and the garage are not minimalist.
Those are David's domain. But on the main floor, there's not a lot on the walls. There's not a lot of things that would make it feel cluttery. So very intentional about a calming space that's where things are where they need to be. And when people walk in, they sense that.
Yeah, you've kind of said some of this, but a metaphor is we set the table for folks as they arrive. There's that intention of, folding the napkins. We not literally, but we are setting the table for our guests. And so it can be anything from soft music that we might have on to the lighting, that there's enough light. They're not tripping up the stairs, but it's not so glary that, they're blinded by it. There's fresh coffee, tea. It's got the amenities, I suppose, to help them feel at home. Yeah.
And we are very careful to cultivate a prayerful presence so that, when we hear a knock on the door, the doorbell ring, or we are anticipating a guest, when we literally go to meet them and open the door, I think both of us are aware of this desire to sort of downshift and be really grounded so that when we greet them, we're able to be very present to them and present to that moment of receiving them.
And it's as simple as eye contact, having soft eyes, if you want to think of it that way, to the phrase, I just think of all the times I've walked people up to their room, and as I leave, I will ask them if they need anything else, if that's enough to get them started, and let them know, I'm glad you're here. And I will say that we're so glad you're here.
One of the things that I think is really important in hospitality is, especially with people who have never been in the space you're sharing with them, is to just kind of orient them. So when people arrive, if they're new or if it's been a while since they've been here, often David will just walk them through the main floor and just point some things out. Like we have a sideboard in the dining room where we've got snacks for our guests, chocolate and trail mix and granola bars and fruit and that kind of thing. And then we'll turn the corner to the butler's pantry area where we've got coffee available and tea and a drawer full of all kinds of teas and mugs that they can grab and the condiments to for their coffee and tea. And then we'll kind of point out some spaces that they might appreciate sitting in. I'm aware that oftentimes when you walk into a new space, you don't know what to do with yourself. So there's something about orienting a person and saying, would you like to come and sit down? Would you like a cup of tea? And show them where things are, show them where the bathroom is. That's really important. You know, the main floor, half bath. And so we point out the door and say, that's where, yeah, the bathroom is. We have this is really, again, I'm getting into the, to the weeds here, but David installed an automatic light because the light switch is on the other side of the door and it's awkward when you walk in because you don't know where it is. So it comes on immediately. And just thoughtful touches like that make people feel welcomed in the space.
Mm-hmm. So we ask them what they need, anything that would be helpful to them as they settle in. And at meals, particularly, we will ask them, and again, our context is a bit unique, but we'll ask if there's a particular focus to their time here. Not assume that, oh, they are here for a generic retreat, but there's likely some specific need or longing or question that is good for them to verbalize and good for us to know about as much as they would want to share initially.
Yeah. And you're really good at that. I always appreciate David taking some initiative with drawing people out in terms of what are your desires or intentions for this time. And then speaking about meals, I get a lot of questions about meals. And again, this is our context and there are probably some applications to yours, but we do provide meals for our guests, all 3 meals if they're overnight guests. And a lot of folks who are interested in doing retreat ministry wonder if that's necessary. And I would say no, I think there's other ways to do that. This is one of the ways that we really enjoy offering hospitality. I like to cook. I'm pretty comfortable in the kitchen. But, you know, some of my philosophy is I keep things pretty simple. I don't do really involved recipes. We try to buy really quality, healthy, good food, and beautiful food, but we just present it in a simple and lovely way, but not with a lot of fuss. One of the things that I have learned that I think makes the biggest difference if you're serving any kind of meal is to have all your preparations done before people arrive. And I know that's a tall order for many. If you've got a lot going on in your home, for instance, if you have children in your home, that's probably going to be difficult to do. But anytime you're having folks into your home for a meal, and this includes my family, I try to have everything done, even if it has to sit out on the counter with wrapped in foil. We had a group last week, a larger group, and we grilled some steak. And so we had it all wrapped up and ready, and the buffet set with plates and silverware and napkins, so that when they arrived, we can be completely present and I wasn't distracted by what I needed to finish up with the meal. And it makes just a huge difference. And again, food is not absolutely essential in offering hospitality, but it sure is, it seems to be synonymous. But you can keep it really simple. You don't even have to offer a meal. It could just be a light snack or even a cup of tea or a glass of wine, whatever it would be, but just be intentional about how you serve it and make sure you have the preparations done ahead of time. You'll be more calm. And I think that the guest will also feel that sense of your presence. So what do you find yourself thinking about and wondering right now? Are there some questions sort of bubbling up? Now, we probably don't have time to answer them, but I would love for you just to take a moment and jot them down in the chat. If there's any really specific questions you have, or even things that you wish we would clarify, and we will respond as best we can to these when we send you the link to the recording. So take a moment and just jot down any questions you have.
My guess is they can multitask. So I'm going to
Okay,
say this,
all right.
it's not to beat up on old Martha again, but the story of Mary and Martha comes to mind. And who would you rather be welcomed by? I think what you were describing was that Martha wasn't contained in herself. She didn't have everything prepared. So it was for her that, kind of what you're describing. It's not so that the meal's ready for the guests. It's so that you're ready for the guests.
That's right.
So that you can find that one thing that's important.
Mhm.
We'll probably pick up some of these questions
Yeah.
along the way.
Yeah, I
too.
think we
That's
probably
great.
will.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's turn to the second tenet. Another tenet of the Benedictine approach to hospitality is that it's essential to the ministry of hospitality to honor every person by accepting both their virtues and their flaws. We don't get to pick and choose. Well, I guess we do get to pick and choose, but if it's Christ-like hospitality, we don't get to pick and choose. And so Benedict puts it this way: honor the infirmity of others. Not honor the gifts, not honor the status, but honor the infirmity of others.
Or honor the things we like about this person.
Yeah.
But really, we're to honor the things that maybe we don't like. And how do we do that? How do we honor them? When we open the door to people at Fall Creek Abbey, we really never know who is going to be standing on the threshold. Many of the folks we meet are strangers. They fill out a contact form. They give us a little bit of information about them, but that's all we know.
And when you meet a new family, think about this, in your neighborhood or a church, and you invite them over, they may look like you and your kind. They may look like a lot of people but each person has a story, a hidden story to you. And so hospitality creates a space for that story to begin to emerge. And what emerges begins to flesh this out, that this person is the other. They're not wholly like me. We share a lot of similarities, but there's a lot that we don't.
Yeah. To say that hospitality will put to the test our ability to honor the infirmity of others, to accept people for who they are, and even for where they are, is a given. And so it's important to be aware that this is going to be put to the test for you, that you're going to encounter people, that there will be things you may not like about them.
So when we say yes to the ministry of hospitality, we're saying yes to engaging with people who are not only different from us, but people who have rough edges, they have blind spots, they have irritating behavior. Sounds like my family. Sounds like me. People who have different views on politics or social issues or spirituality. So it becomes a stew with a lot of ingredients. And are we able to create a space that welcomes the infirmities of others, or our perception of their infirmities?
Maybe that's the crucible that I mentioned early on, that really begins to address some things in ourselves.
So listening with acceptance, we could describe that as the spiritual act of hospitality. There's obviously the meal making and the space creating that's external, but this listening with acceptance is the spiritual hospitality and skill that we need to hone if we're to choose to offer this ministry, if the ministry is to go beyond just food and drink. Henry Nouwen, in a newscast, or I guess it was a newsletter called Listening as Spiritual Hospitality, says this: to listen is very hard because it asks of us so much interior stability that we no longer need to prove ourselves by speeches, arguments, statements, or declarations. True listeners no longer have an inner need to make their presence known. They are free to receive, free to welcome, and to accept. Wow.
Yeah. That quote is in your notes, by the way, but boy, it's worth sitting with for a while. But I'm really curious about that term, interior stability. I'm wondering what that means to you, or what it even feels like to you. Maybe even feels like in your body to experience an interior stability. No one is saying that true listening is an act of listening to know, to understand, without the need to explain oneself. It's not merely listening to the other until there's a little break in the conversation so that I can add my part, and then we can just play a little ping pong back and forth with each other in the conversation. But it really is possessing this inner stability that allows me in some ways to recede so that there's enough space for this person to show up. It's non-competitive and they get to be in that space. And by the way, this is spiritual direction. If you're not familiar with it, this is how I would describe spiritual direction. But this quote reminds me and connects with a definition, I think, of what it means to have that kind of interior stability. It's from a book called A Failure of Nerve by Edwin Friedman, who was a family systems expert. And he talked about the way that we engage within a family system in a healthy way is to become a non-anxious, self-differentiated person who remains in relationship with the other. Now that maybe sounds like a lot of psychobabble to you, I don't know. But to me, that gives me a vision for how to possess that inner stability, to be non-anxious, which means that I might be with somebody who is highly anxious. Maybe they're really worked up about something. But rather than take that on, I let them hold that and I remain non-anxious, recognizing that that's not mine to carry. To be self-differentiated means that I know where I end and this person begins. I have some boundaries to myself. I know who I am. I know what I think or what I believe. And it doesn't have to match what this person thinks, what their perspectives on political issues are or theological issues, that I can be different from them and they can be different from me, and I'm differentiated from them as they are from me. But I can stay in relationship with them, remain connected to them. And that's what allows me to do that. It's having this interior stability from being non-anxious and self-differentiated. And I think this is so key in the ministry of hospitality. If we're to create hospitable spaces where people are going to have different points of view about lots of things.
And all that you've described directly affects and impacts the quality of conversation we have with one another. And so much of hospitality is creating the space to have life-transforming, nourishing conversations with one another. Conversation, including this listening aspect, is one of the 7 core values at Fall Creek Abbey. We've said this needs to be named. That conversation is what really facilitates the work of God in people's lives here. And so we do our best to invite meaningful conversations. We're not satisfied just to keep things kind of superficial and your favorite word, copacetic. Especially around lunch and dinner table. What beautiful times to engage with more leisurely, but I don't know, meaningful, timely, conversations. We seek to ask good questions, like
Yeah.
Beth has said, even bring up thoughtful topics, that there are things that we're thinking about, and we're together and we'll propose a topic of something that we've read or something we've been using. So it's not that listening is just one way. It is a dialogue, and we share personal stories with one another, and we share our story. And sometimes our stories are just as instructive as as listening. So it's this free give and take of the kind of conversation that Beth mentioned, of being kind of a non-anxious, self-differentiated human being.
I also want to mention, though, that we really try to tune in to the needs of our guests. And you might want to do this as well. As you're hosting people, you'll notice that for some people, they really aren't there to have conversation. And so we try to kind of read their body language and their needs. And if they are not in need of that, we make sure that we don't work hard at engaging them. Or if other guests seem to be intruding, that we give some space to them. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we do that.
We laugh a lot too.
Well, we do. Yeah.
So yeah, I think we would misrepresent how much fun we have with our guests.
It's not all serious.
Yes, I think that's really important to name.
Yeah.
Yeah, as Beth mentioned, I mean, some guests just need to be left alone or encouraged to just go off and swing on the swing, or
have a meal by themselves,
or have a meal by themselves.
We always give them that option. Yeah. There are other guests, though, that really long for conversation, and that's another thing we pay attention to. And I'm thinking about parents of young kids who feel like they don't get enough adult conversation. And so here they get a meal prepared for them, and they get somebody to clean up after them, and they get to have a good conversation. That's a win-win-win.
Wow, that is a win-win-win. Yeah. But on occasion, we've had guests who, can we say, lack self-awareness?
Yes.
Were too loud, too talkative, and somewhat to significantly self-absorbed. And in these situations, as kind of the host, I mean, if we can say that in this hospitality we're hosting, that we've needed to intervene in a very gentle and subtle way, and yet seek to shape the space, the experience for them as well as for others. A lot of people, they don't know how to be at home and at rest. And so they need some guidance to how to do that.
Yeah.
And so we're protecting the space both for others and for them when that happens. Were you going to say something?
Well, I like how you said that, that we want to be tone setters. So we're stewards not only of the space itself that we're hoping to create, but we're also stewards of the environment that people are experiencing when they're in the space. And so kind of being a tone setter, which means that we have to watch. And if we notice some things that are disrupting the kind of atmosphere, the kind of conversations and listening and quiet that we want to embody, then we have to gently, politely, and yet very clearly step in. So for instance, let's say we're having dinner and there's somebody who seems to be sort of loud, and they always bring everything back to themselves, and they're very talkative. And we just realize that this is kind of, it feels tiring. And we can tell that other guests maybe are starting to feel fatigued. We'll bring dinner to a close, and we might do it in such a way that we say, well, how about if we move into the quiet of the evening so that we can have some time for prayer and reflection. It's just a way to remind everyone of why we're here, that this is the kind of hospitality that we offer, is quiet and a little more of a solitude in community. It might be excusing ourselves, and because we have work to do, which is often then a signal that it's time to bring the meal to an end or the conversation to an end. So if we have someone who seems like they want to engage us more than we either have the capacity for or that we think is in their best interest, and we will have to excuse ourselves and move on to work that we do.
Mhm.
We recently had a guest that was kind of trying. She
Is it I, Lord?
no, it's not you. But she treated our space more like a hotel. And she was up very late, going up and down the creaky old stairs, and opened the door when we'd already turned the security system on and it went off, and was very dominating during our meals. And so afterwards, we decided we need something a little more explicit. So we created a Welcome to Fall Creek Abbey little piece that we have on each of the desks in each of the guest rooms. And it has really helped to state in writing, here's what we're trying to create here. So think about the spaces where you want to offer hospitality, and how can you create some signage or communicate the message of this is what we're wanting to create here in terms of our space.
I think what we're trying to say is, as beautiful as the word hospitality is, it's not all sunshine and roses. And before we say yes to any ministry of hospitality, it's important to be clear about what we're saying yes to, or potentially saying yes to. We're saying yes to people we may not like.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying yes to people who we can just count on. They are different from us. We're saying yes to the possibility of being irritated, inconvenienced, and even triggered.
Yeah.
But we're also saying yes to discovering real beauty in another person's story, as well as receiving gifts from those we host. I call that mutual hospitality. We're saying yes to be welcomed as we are welcoming the other.
Mm-hmm.
And wasn't that the ministry of Jesus? Really, it's if you look at this theme of hospitality, the ministry of Jesus, he was saying yes to people who were a hot mess. And I'm sure he was triggered and inconvenienced and irritated. And yet, that's what he said yes to. And I think that's the invitation in following Jesus in the ministry of hospitality, is realizing these are the ones who need our welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to think that a lot of times the people that we feel inconvenienced by are the people who have felt like they're an inconvenience almost everywhere they go. And so they're longing to be seen. And, for someone to create enough space for them to bear witness to their life. Yeah. So again, I'm going to invite you, if you have any questions regarding this second tenet of honoring others' infirmities, just write those in the chat, and we will see if we can't respond to them when we send you the recording. Okay, so feel free to jot down some questions. And then we're going to move on to the third tenet, and then the fourth one after that.
Mm-hmm. So third tenet of Benedictine hospitality that's really been a lifesaver and influential for us is one that's woven through the rule of Saint Benedict, and it's this: that balancing solitude and prayer with work and serving, of growing and learning this art, really, of balancing our need for solitude and prayer with the work that we do and the way that we serve in the world. Benedict wrote, "Idleness is the enemy of the soul. Therefore, the brothers should have a specified period of manual labor as well as for prayerful reading." So these monks were not just, what's the word, slackers, who were just sitting around doing nothing. They were balancing the work that they were called to do and a life of prayer.
Yeah, so what's really interesting here, and this was something my spiritual director actually shared with me, is that Benedict thinks about balance very differently than we tend to. It's not the idea that I want to live a balanced life,
Mhm.
which kind of makes balance the end in itself, or almost like an idol. I want to live a balanced life. Instead, Benedict suggests that we use balance as a verb, which suggests that I balance my life by seeking times of solitude and rest and prayer, along with times of being with people and doing good work, extroverting. So you could even think of it as that continuum of times to extrovert and then times to introvert.
And so the Benedictines, they are masters really at balancing this, and it's their way of life. Really, their way of life is one of kind of cycles of balance. So 1/3 of their day is spent in prayer, another third typically in manual labor of how they support themselves, and then a third in study or a craft that they are developing. And it just becomes this beautiful rhythm. And yet they are some of the most highly productive people on the face of the planet. So we typically don't think of monks as productive. And yet, as they have kept with this rhythm, this rebalancing of work and prayer and study over the years and decades of their life, they have produced amazing things. So why is this so important to the ministry of hospitality? To have the capacity for people, we need time alone without people. We need time without people. So for extroverts, that's like, oh, I do. And yet for introverts, they need time with people. Lonnie Collins Pratt, in her book, Radical Hospitality, says, we cannot practice genuine Benedictine hospitality unless we come to it through solitude. Come to it through solitude. And I picture it, solitude precedes the welcome. It, in some ways, I think of it as surrounding. It's almost an inner solitude and silence that we carry with us. And then it completes the act of welcome. So we cannot practice hospitality unless we come to it through solitude.
I like how you said that. And I think what we're wanting to stress here, and this would be, I think, Benedict's, what he's really trying to say is that solitude, or sometimes called contemplation, and this extroversion or this work that we do in hospitality, they're not mutually exclusive. They're actually very interconnected. In fact, they flow from one to the other. They have maybe even a symbiotic relationship. They're a lot like, remember the terms that you learned in grade school, probably science class, of centrifugal and centripetal force. You did a little experiment where you tied a ball on a long string and then you began to swirl it above your head, and lo and behold, the string went straight and the ball stayed in the air, and you held on. So that's the relationship between contemplation and action, or solitude and rest with hospitality. Centrifugal force is what pulls us out into the world to do good work and ministry. And centripetal force, or contemplation and solitude, is what keeps us grounded. And they're integrally important to one another. Take a look at the diagram that we provided in your notes, and I think David's going to share on the screen. So here we have contemplation, which is just another term for solitude, rest, prayer, time, introversion, time without people, is balanced by action, which is another word for work and serving and hospitality. But right in the middle is this diagram, or right in the middle is this fulcrum. And the fulcrum that Benedict named is prayer and discernment. Prayer and discernment are those spiritual practices that help us learn to balance the need for contemplation and the need for action. When it's time to be alone, when it's time to move out into the world and take action.
So if we employ balance as a verb, as Beth is suggesting here, I think it is important that we, in some ways, it reframes balance, not as an end in itself, but as a means to living in the world, living a life of service, even radical service, in a sustained way. And I think it's just instructive on multiple fronts. Some of us can create balance as an idol. It's this ideal that we're restlessly just kind of uncomfortable with the way we are. But you think about walking, it's just kind of this movement of losing your balance, regaining your balance, falling forward, rebalancing. And so I think it right sizes what can be our expectations about life. Is we're going to have to get used to this rebalancing act. And in a major way, we're going to have to learn to engage and disengage, engage, disengage. And we're probably always going to be a bit over or under compensating, but as long as we recognize that this is the way forward, I think we'll be okay.
Yeah. And I think it's important to point out that if we employ balance as the verb here, that it doesn't make contemplation and action opposites, because they have a relationship to one another. They depend on one another. In fact, Martin Laird, in his book, Into the Silent Land, says that the opposite of contemplation isn't action, it's reaction. And isn't that descriptive of how we live when we haven't gotten enough contemplation or solitude or time away and time alone to be? We become very reactive in the way that we live. So they're not opposites, they're complementary. They depend on one another.
Al and Cannon, in their book, Urging of the Heart, describe, I think, what happens if we're pursuing balance as a verb, that we become a contemplative in action whose doing flows out of a rich inner life of prayer and discernment. And I love that image of what we are doing and what we are offering. It's not coming from our compulsions or sense of obligations or trying to get in other people's business, but it's coming from a place of real grounded discernment of what is ours to do and seeing it flow, not as this compulsive activity. And finally, we, I think, follow the pattern of Jesus, who lived balance as a verb. We see him embodying this in the ebb and flow between the inward journey of prayer, as he would slip away to a quiet place, to the desert, and then the outward journey of serving. So we want to look at just a few things that what we're learning about balance in our work at Fall Creek Abbey. And this gets pretty practical, but we've learned what helps us to live out balance as a verb is what we call slow mornings. We don't do early morning appointments. We don't do breakfast meetings. I think of all the breakfast meetings when I was like chugging coffee and trying to just be with someone, but barely half awake, or just trying to squeeze that in. I don't do morning appointments at all. Beth still has some morning appointments, but, and then even as simple as breakfast, what we do, we keep it really, really simple. It's a simple meal. So keeping that morning slow and a bit sparse and some spaciousness that it's almost like the day unfolds rather than kind of forcing our way into the day.
Yeah, and another thing about the slow mornings is we typically don't engage with our guests. So we might see a guest and we certainly greet them and say good morning, but we tuck away in our own private places and spend our time the way we need to spend our time so that we are able to fill up. Now, I know that some of you, that is just an impossibility. You can't do that because you've got children in the home, or you have to be at work at 7 or something like that. Understandable, but maybe just think about, where can I be a little more leisurely and linger in my time of grounding in solitude and silence, that
Or even
contemplation.
that moving in and
Yeah.
out can be a little more frequent, but
Frequent,
smaller.
smaller doses. We also are early risers and we go to bed pretty early. So that's helpful to us. Again, that might not be your thing, and that is absolutely fine, but find a way to get some quality time for yourself. And then the second thing we're learning, and this has probably been the thing that we would say has kept us going, and we call it the spiritual practice of calendaring. In a way, we have learned to obey what we have put in our calendar. So let me tell you some things we've put in our calendar. So we have 1 day a week, which is our Sabbath. It starts on Saturday night. So I can't tell you what a big difference it makes to switch your thinking from Sunday being the Sabbath and, just being that time after church to starting it on Saturday night, which is the way you would do it if you were raised in a Jewish home. So we start on Saturday night. I even had it in my phone for a few years just to remind me at 5 o'clock that I was turning towards Sabbath. So 1 day a week, we keep a Sabbath. We try not to work. We often are with our families, but we also take naps always. We take walks in nature. We rest, we read, we do the kinds of things that restore our soul. Another thing that's in our calendar is that we take 1 week a month where we don't host and we don't meet with our spiritual direction clients. Now we do some work during this week. It's the last week of our month. So we have some catch-up time. We do projects. We do one-off meetings sometimes, but it's not often that we host people or we do our regular work. And that has been incredibly helpful just to have that space at the end of our week. And then we take 1 month a year as a sabbatical. We've probably done this, I think, 4 or 5 years, where we have taken July off. And it felt like a kind of a big step for us to say no to any hosting or any work and therefore any income. And yet it has been so healthy for us to do this. And I think is why we've been able to continue to do what we're doing. It's made it sustainable. And then finally, in terms of our calendar, we block certain days off for unscheduled one-off appointments, administration, and to work on creative projects like writing projects. So I only meet with my spiritual direction clients on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then on Thursday and Friday, I generally have those days open to do other things, other kind of work, because I think there's this tendency to think, oh, somehow I can fit this particular thing in the cracks and crevices of life. And that generally doesn't happen. And so this is one of the ways that we have learned how to manage our time and our work.
So we don't feel guilty about blocking off days where we would just say, these are no hosting days. And in some ways, it can create a dilemma for someone who that's when the only week they can come. But we've found that for us to continue to keep on keeping on, we need to do that because we're active parents and grandparents. I have parents that need my care and attention from time to time. We need our own weekends to do what we do. And I would say in some ways it continues, though. We need that space to receive hospitality ourselves, to be hospitable to ourselves, for us to offer hospitality to one another and our families, those who are closest to us. So I don't think we really feel guilty about taking these days off, do we?
We don't. I mean, maybe we might have at first, but we've gotten over it real quick. And it really has, I think, made what we do.
And I think because we want to offer a certain quality of hospitality, not a harried, yes mode all the time, 24/7 hospitality.
Yeah. It reduces the chaos that is not very helpful to creating a hospitable environment. So we're going to move right into our fourth tenet or principle of Benedictine hospitality. And this one really has been also kind of a life-saving principle for us. And the way that St. Benedict put it is that the presence of the guest should not, however, be allowed to disrupt the routine that has been established. The work of the day must go on while guests are provided with their due. So, in other words, Benedict is describing a hospitality that is both inclusive and boundaried. Well, we might imagine that to be truly hospitable, I'm going to have to be available to people 24/7. This approach would be self-defeating. It wouldn't take long before we become resentful, not to mention the frustration of never being able to get to other important things that we have to do. So Benedict made it clear to the brothers that they were to be warm and welcoming to all of their guests, and they were to continue to do their work. To maintain capacity for hospitality requires setting and keeping boundaries.
Yeah, and this has been really critical for us, for our lives and work, because our life and our work is kind of all in the same container. And so that may be a bit unusual for others who have, by virtue of their work, it's a little bit more boundary. But in our context, while we host guests, we're still meeting with directees or other individuals. We're offering spiritual direction training and micro counseling with clients. We still have just the routine, I'm the groundskeeper and Beth's the cook. And, we have that hat that we have to put on. And so to do that, we have to have this, how did you put it? Boundaried dimension. And if we didn't learn to welcome guests and continue our work, it would just be too much. It would be the too muchness factor again, and we would be burned out and then resentful of the very people that we were seeking to establish what we do for.
Mm-hmm. So you might be trying to imagine, how do you do this? How do you communicate this to the people you're hosting? And think about your context where you will offer hospitality. How do you be inclusive and yet boundaried? So sometimes it's subtle. And if subtle doesn't work, then we might have to be a little less subtle. But so we might communicate by our actions as well as our words. I'm going to need to move on right now. So that is as simple as, I may see a guest and I could tell that they would like to engage, but rather than stop in my tracks, I simply acknowledge them and I kind of keep moving because I have something that I need to do. I'm warm and hospitable, but I don't stop and I don't engage. We remember that we're not here to entertain our guests, but that we can be available to them. It's just not available always. We remember that we're not responsible for their time, and it's important for them to own responsibility with God for the time that they're having with us. And so we keep those things in mind so that we can kind of maintain that non-anxious, self-differentiated way of relating while we stay connected to them. It's also okay for us to ask from them what we need. So we had a guest maybe last weekend, and we were also hosting a group. So I had to let her know that I wouldn't have dinner available for her on Friday night. And it just felt like that was probably the better solution than feeling like I needed to prepare a meal for her and then juggle with this group that was coming. So sometimes we have to ask for what we need and want, and that is okay to do. And that will be very helpful in your ministry and hospitality.
Good. Well, our hope today was that we would be able to recast a vision for this beautiful ministry of hospitality. I look back and, well, the words of the Great Commission, go, go, go. And that was kind of the watchword of faithfully serving and following Christ, was go. But there's another verse in Scripture where they asked Jesus where he was staying, and he said, come and see. And I think this ministry of hospitality is a come and see ministry of inviting people, welcoming them into your life. Hospitality is a sacred ministry of creating intentional environment of welcome whereby strangers become friends, where peace becomes palpable, where your home literally becomes a house of prayer and Christ is welcomed over and over and over again in your midst. And we feel like that's a vision worth cultivating.
We sure do. So we've introduced you to 4 grounding tenets of Benedictine hospitality: receiving every person as if you're receiving Jesus, honoring the infirmities of others through acceptance, balancing times of solitude and contemplation with times of action and hospitality and work, and then practicing inclusion with boundaries. We've also provided in the notes some questions for you that we think will help you reflect on what you've heard and to pay attention to how you're being stirred, how the Spirit is stirring you toward this ministry. I'm not going to list those. We can send those along again in an email with the recording, but I encourage you, if you have the time after the seminar is over, take 10 minutes and just jot down your responses to those questions while everything is fresh for you. We would love for you to do that, and even to share with us any responses to the questions. We'd love to hear. You can just send those through our website.
Well, we would like to close our time together by praying. And I know it's a bit awkward at times to pray, but maybe we've all gotten used to this by praying dispersed like this. But we'd invite you to pray together an excerpt from Friday's liturgy and prayers at twilight. And prayers at twilight are 7 values that we've focused on here at Fall Creek Abbey, and hospitality is Friday. So that worked out well. So can we pray together either in your minds, your silence, or if you're comfortable, out loud? So together, O ever welcoming Spirit, to be invited to feast at your table is the most humbling and delightful honor. Your house is filled with grace. Your countenance beams with acceptance. Your meal of bread and wine, a most holy and nourishing communion. How often we narrow our doors and shorten our tables to include only our own. How often we keep to ourselves, hoarding our good gifts instead of sharing them with friends and strangers and with those in need. How little we value hearth and home as a place of sharing sacred moments that transform us. We ask for the grace this day to set the table, prepare the meal, send out the invitations, and welcome guests as family into our lives and homes. For everyone who enters is a Christ bearer, and every meal shared is a feast. May our hearts be warmed by God's generous reception, and may the afterglow ignite in us a liberality of spirit to offer gifts of hospitality. As Christ's co-hosts, may we expand our circles in every direction. May our tables become intimate spaces where we see one another, hear one another, and where the deep thirst and hunger of our bodies and souls is satisfied. Amen.
Well, thank you so very much for joining us. And we just want to say that if you by chance are curious about our story and would like to know a little bit more about it, and even perhaps be given some food for thought around your calling to this ministry of hospitality, you might consider reading Starting Something New, Spiritual Direction for Your God-Given Dream. It's a book I wrote a few years back, and it tells the story of Fall Creek Abbey and then helps the reader understand the gestational process of birthing a dream. If you're a little bit curious about what makes us tick, then you might want to pick up our book, When Faith Becomes Sight, our first book that we co-authored together. And I would describe it as a primer on the contemplative life. It really unpacks what the contemplative life is, not just by telling you, but actually by showing you how to live contemplatively. So again, we are so grateful for our time together, and we really, really thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, or if you would like to reach out, we are more than welcome to schedule a conversation or a visit, even better. We'd love to have you. We've had dozens of people come to Fall Creek Abbey just to talk with us because they have some kind of a vision for doing something similar to what we're doing. So if that would be something you would like to do, please let us know, and we would welcome you. And we hope that you will stay in touch. So thank you again for joining us. Bless you, each and every one, as you live out your vision of hospitality in your context. So great to see you all.
Peace to you.